Hello, dear iOS developers. Welcome to today's workshop. Today we will talk about SwiftUI plus GraphQL, a beautiful combination helping us speeding our development speed. We will provide a 45-minute app recipe for you today. I'm Tadeh. An iOS developer and data engineer from Formaloo. I have 4+ years of experience in these fields, and also make sure to check out formal.com. In one sentence, we integrate your data wherever it is and power it up with AI. Thousands of businesses of all sizes, from small e-commerces to large enterprises, use our services to analyze their customers, increase their conversion rate, and also reduce churn by about 85%. Also, make sure to check out our application on the App Store, which is written completely with SwiftUI. You can see how it works in the larger scale of an application and get an insight. We will talk in Swift language here, but let me first introduce to SwiftUI and GraphQL separately. SwiftUI is a very very known and also new framework, UI framework introduced by Apple about 2 years ago. It's very easy to learn. It's very fast to develop, and also it's very decorative, so you can easily use it. For example, as you can see in this example, the hello world text is just showing in the middle of the screen on the right. Also, let me introduce you to GraphQL. GraphQL is an API server service which provides server client connection very easily with its beautiful schema and graph style. For example, if you can see here, we describe, it has 3 steps. We describe our data. For example, we have a project type, which has 3 fields: name, tagline, contributors, which is an area of users. And also, when we have in the client side, it's we ask for what we want and we get what we asked. It's very easy. It's very fast. For example, now in a project called GraphQL, we will ask for a tagline and we will get the tagline of that project. No contributors, no name, and simply we get what we want. This is the opposite of what RESTful provides for us, RESTful APIs, because in RESTful APIs, for example, for an information of customers, we get lots of fields that we don't use, for example, in different clients, websites, iOS, Android. With using this, we can simply get the predictable result we ask. So let's go to the coding part. Open the Xcode. Let's create a new Xcode project. And also make sure to choose SwiftUI as interface and also UIKit app delegate as lifecycle, because SwiftUI app is available too as a lifecycle, but it supports iOS 14 plus. Language Swift, everything is great. Click next. And we will save it just here. So after we created project, it's time to close it. I know it's really fast, but let me make sure to quit this after the creation process is complete. Great. Now let's go to the Apple GraphQL website. What is Apple? Apple is a client to connect to GraphQL servers, like we use Alamo Fire to connect API RESTful server and query our endpoints there. We will use Apple as a client to connect our GraphQL server today. So using path file, we install the library. Let's go to terminal, cd to our project, initialize a pod file. Also, let's open that pod file. Now, below the comment line, let's just say pod Apollo. Great. Save this pod file and let's go back and install it. Okay, great. Now everything is installed and it's time to open our newly created XC workspace file showing here. Make sure to open this file because this is the file containing our pod libraries. So the remaining step to install our Apollo framework is to generate a code building phase. So yeah, adding a code generation build step. Here, after we opened up our project, we will go to the project directory and clicking on the SwiftUI workshop, go to the build phases. We will create a new run script here. We will copy and paste the code showing in this section, copy, yeah, and paste it here. Simply what this step does is finding any .graphql file which will contain the queries we want to make to our server, looking for a schema file, schema.json file, which I will explain it later, and generating an API.swift file before compiling the project so we can use it to get access to our models from the query files. Great. Now let's go back here and check everything is okay. Yeah. So the only thing remained here is to drag this new run script just above the compile sources in your list of build phases, so it will execute before your code is compiled. We will call it also general Apollo GraphQL API here by double clicking on it and dragging above the compile sources. Yeah, great. It's here. We have everything correct. Just saving the project. And let's go to the next step, which is working and playing with our API. I have chosen Rick and Morty API for the purpose of this workshop. I think its fans will be happy now. So let's see what it's containing. It contains the characters, locations, and episodes of Rick and Morty, which by clicking on each of them, you can see the data structure. For example, the episodes type contains the info results, which in results is an array of episodes. And each of episodes contain name, air date, episode, characters, and etc. So for example, if you want to get the name of every episode in this series, we have to say episodes, just results, and name. Simple as that, and we will get the name of each of the episodes of Rick and Morty. Also, we have a pagination option here, which I will let you to add this to our open source project, which you can see in the description. Then you can access to our open source repository of the completed project of this workshop. So you can add, for example, pagination, etc., other features to it. So great. Now, for example, we also can get a single episode, which we will see later how it works. For now, we want a schema.json file. One of the best parts of GraphQL is that it provides a clear definition of the data available in your API through the schema. The schema describes that types and fields you can query on, and also include any relationship between those data. So you can two options to get your schema. One is in here. You can just select download and JSON, but I've seen that the JSON here, JSON file downloaded from here is deprecated. So I will show you a workaround for this. Just right click and go to inspect elements. From here, the network tab, just refresh the page and you will see some requests made here. One of the requests is called GraphQL, which you can see here, just the main URL. When you click on it in the response tab of that, you will see a schema.json, which you can copy and paste it in a schema.json empty file. I've done it already, so I will just copy and paste it here. Yeah, just dragging here. Make sure to check the copy items if needed checkbox and leave it like here. The next step is to make our queries. So let's create a new file. Search for an empty file here, name it queries.graphql. I'll simply drag it to the top. And here we have to use operation name and operation type. The operation type is either query and describes what type of operation we will use. For example, querying, mutation, and etc., which you can check it out in the GraphQL's documentation. The operation name is a meaningful and explicit name of your operation. Also, you can think of it like a function, function name in your desiring programming language. For example, in Swift, we call it func, for example, a name, and etc. Here we will say query get episodes, and we will just copy and paste this by adding some other fields. For example, the ID, the episode. What is episode? Episode is just the code of that episode. For example, season 1, episode 1. As you can see here, represent the textual data and the code of the episode. Yeah. Great. And we also want, in our application, we want to have a view showing the episodes of Rick and Morty, and also whenever someone click on one of them, it will show the details of the project. For example, the air date, characters, and etc. So we want to have another query called get episode. It will get an ID as an input. For example, ID of type integer. Also, we have a separate type ID, which is a string, which will work, which we'll use here because the input type is, I guess, a string here. Yeah, it is not intended to be human readable. When expected as an input type, any string or integer such as input value will be accepted as an ID. We will stick to this ID. Whatever we get as an input, integer, string, no difference, it will work. So let's stick to the string now and get episode and calling this API here ID. Great. So now what we want from an episode is also its ID, name, episode code. Also, we want air date and also adding characters. What characters offers us is a character type, which has so much fields, but we will, for the sake of this workshop, we will just use the name and the image of each character so we can show it on the details page. We will say, for example, ID, the name, the image, and it's enough, I think, for now. Yeah, everything is cool. Now let's go to the next step, which is building this project. So we can see that our API.swift file will generate or not. This is what the run script we added before we will do for us now using this queries.graphql file and the schema.json file. It will generate us an API.swift file here, which we can just drag to our projects directory and use. Great. Now we can see that API.swift file is created, and we will just drag and drop it here. So we can see in our projects directory. Great. No need to check the copy items if needed because it's already in our project folder. Great. In the file, you can see it has different data types generated automatically by Apollo for us, for example, an episodes, variable, other types which you can check out with your project. The next step is to configure our network layer or service layer, but whichever you can call. I will create a Swift file, calling it network, dragging it below the API.swift. We will use the Apollo library here to create our Apollo clients to make the connection to our server. We will call it in a struct network. What it will contain, it will contain singleton called static variable called share, which will be a type of network. I will explain more about the singletons here. Let's add an, first let's talk about the singletons. Singletons are objects that should only ever be created once, then shared everywhere you want to get access to them. The struct creating an instance of itself as a static variable, as you can see here, which means the only instance this network class and network struct will have is the one it created. So it will be network.shared. No other instances will be acceptable here. So we have also want API, Apollo API clients returning here. So we will call private just for set, private set lazy variable called Apollo, which will be an Apollo client type, and it will contain a URL. What URL we will use? We will use the, make sure it's correct. And this URL here, we will copy and paste to our project. Make sure it's, we'll wrap it here. So let's return an Apollo client using this URL. We will force unwrap this URL because we are making sure that this URL is correct. Don't forget to close this lazy variable with parentheses, because what you're actually doing is making a call to a function you just created. Also, the point of the lazy variables properties is that they are computed only when they are first needed, after which their value is saved. So make sure to make this lazy and then end this up with parentheses. So great. Now we are switching to our model layer. We will create our model files in a single Swift file. No need to separate files because it's small, and for the sake of this workshop, we will keep it in a single file. Let's call a struct called episode, because we have an episode model. It will be decodable. What is this decodable? As it's written in its documentation, it's a type that can decode itself from an external representation. So we will use this to map to our response from the GraphQL server response. Simply, we have an ID called string. Let's just make it variable. Also, a variable called name. Let's check out with here if everything is correct. Yeah, name, episode code. We have our episode string. And also we have two other fields getting from an episode here, air date and characters. Great. Variable air date as a string, and variable characters, which will be in an area, for example, episode character, which will be found below. And make sure to make these two variables optional, because as you can see here in this query, we don't get the air date and characters, so we will get an error if we don't make these two optional. Also, we want an episode character model, which will also be decodable, and it will contain an ID, name, string, name, string, and also it will contain an image, which will be also string. If you remember from the Yeah, here we got from our episodes a results array, which is an array of episodes. So our response we will get from our server, which will be containing a results array. So we will mapping it to an episodes response model to make everything easier. It will also be decodable. It will contain a results array, which will be an array of episodes. Great. Our model file is complete. Now let's go to our repository layer. I've gotten this layer and added to the MVVM model we will use for this workshop. From the repository pattern of the Android development process, we will call this repository and drag it below the model. What this repository, we use a repository layer to separate the logic that retrieves the data and maps it to the entity model from the business logic that acts on the model we just created here. So it helps us just getting a request from server and just mapping the response to our generated model in our programming language logic layer, model layer. Great. Call it a repository class. Great. What we will do, we will add two functions here. One function called get episodes, and also another function which will be get episodes, which will have an ID of type string. Just forgotten the function. Okay. We want to have an return type of the episodes array here, but we will use the completion handler escaping type and simply just call it an array of episode, and it will return nothing. What is this doing? Completion handler is basically just a function that gets passed as a parameter of another function. The reason that we would want to do this is that we want to be notified when something is complete. Generally, when we use functions that return a value, we just use a synchronize type and we just get the function return whenever we want. But when we are working with asynchronous functions, we want to use completion handlers to wait to the function to complete its load of data from server or anything and then act. So great, we will call to our network layer here, the shared instance we have just created and the Apollo variable. We will fetch our query of get episodes query. It's generated by Apollo itself. We have also cache policy argument we can use, which will handle how our data is loaded completely from server, completely from the cache, or just combining both of them. The cache will be handled by the Apollo client itself, so don't worry about it. For the sake of this workshop, we will just use the fetch, ignoring cache completely. And great, now this function will return us a result type, which we will switch case on it, switch result. In the case of failure, we will just define an error type, which we want to print this error for the sake of this workshop and make it simple. And also in the completion, we don't want to return any array, it will be nil. And then we will handle it in the view model layer. So in the case of success, we want to handle the data we have gotten from the server. What we will do, say just for example, a variable called model. We will say data. It has an episodes result, which you can see here. And in the episodes, we want to map it and also decode it using extension I will drag and drop here. So let's go back and drag this folder here. This folder contains some helper functions, which I will explain later. But for now, we will use this JSON.extension file, which will help us decode our result gotten from server to our model generated here in the models file. So simply let's go and say decode model, and it will be an episodes response model as so. Great. In the completion, we want to just return the results, which will be an array of episodes as we are returning and completing here. Great. And for our get episode, we also want to do the same thing. Shared Apollo fetch. We will get a single episode here with an ID, which we'll get from our function arguments. And for cache policy, again, fetch ignore completely. And as a result here, we simply just switch over it again, switch result. In the case of failure, we will say let error, and we will print out that error, the localized description, completion. Yeah, completion will not show us to us now. Let me just write it like this. We want to add the completion here also. We will say completion. And in this, we also want to use escaping. About escaping, I forgot to explain what this escaping do. Simply, closure is set to escape a function when it's called after that function returns. So it is the one sentence explanation about this escaping keyword, but you can search and learn more about it. It's a little confusing keyword in Swift. So in this completion, we want to return just an episode object with now just returning nothing, and I think everything is okay. So in the case of also success, we want to say let data, and in this data, this time we want to say the let model data, the data episode, and decode this to the episode type itself we have in our model. And just in the completion, we want to return this model. Let me close this also. It's just a little distracting. Now, great. Let me run this so we don't get any error in the model, network, and repository layer. Let's check out if everything is correct and okay. Yeah, we'll succeed. And it's time to just let me explain the first is some views showing here. Here we have a spinner view, which you can see is using the UI kits spinner. Although SwiftUI does a good job of providing many of UI kits UI view subclasses, but it doesn't have all of them yet. So unfortunately, but it's not hard to create a UI view instance in a SwiftUI view and wrap it up. So we will just use UI view representable for the sake of this job, and just attaching a UI activity indicator view, returning it and using in a SwiftUI view. Also, we have a remote image class, which we will use to load our images from a URL and handle its different states, which will be, for example, loading, which will show us a loading picture, or just failure, which will show us a failure picture, or just the image itself, which will be returned in the case of everything is correct and successfully we retrieve the image from the server. Also, we will have a view status enum, which is just, it has 4 cases, non-loading error complete, which will help us handling our view state, for example, showing a spinner when we are loading the data from server, or showing just an error text, or showing the episodes list or episode detail. So let's go to the view model and generating the view model step. We will create a Swift file, call it a view model. It's better always to have separate files, for example, for your view models, but for the sake of this workshop, we will keep it simple and implement both classes in a single file, both view model classes. In this class, we will call it episodes view model, which will conform to the observable object protocol. and will contain an @published variable called state, which will be our view status type and will first be none, and also an @published variable called episodes, which will be an array of episodes. Great. About this observable object and states, published episodes, classes that conform to the observable object protocol can use SwiftUI's @publish property written here. So to automatically announce changes to properties so that any view using the object get their body property reinvoked and the state sync with data. So for example, if the state changes to loading are complete, our episodes view model will be tell the instance to regenerate the view containing itself. Great. Now we will have an initializer called, and it will call the setup function, which will be added now like this, setup. In our episodes view model, we want to make a call to our repository layer. So we will have a variable called repo here, repository instance. So great, let's call repo.getEpisodes. In the completion, we will have an episodes return. As we have discussed here, we will just completion nil, using completion nil here. So we have to unwrap the episodes here to omit any crash of the application when the error got from server. So just use guard, let's episodes simply. Else, we will just first put our view state to error. Don't forget the self keyword and just return. Now, if everything is okay and we have gotten our episodes from server, we will say just simply self.episodes will we have contain episodes and our state will be complete. Great. Also, when we are initializing our episodes view model in the view itself, we want to our view to go to the loading process. It's that simple. Now we just copy and paste this code for our episode view model. Simply say episode view model, everything is the same. But here we have to just define some example episode. So we have to initialize this with an object. For example, let's here create a static variable called example. It will be a type of episode and it will return an episode with everything empty. For example, let me make sure, for example, ID is the same. I think no need for this. Yeah, ID, it will burn, for example, no name, empty string as an episode, no date, and empty character array. So as an initial value, we will say episode.example. Great. Now everything is set up here. Just we will have some differences here. We won't initialize it because we want to get an ID from our setup function. And here also we will get a single episode containing the ID, great. And just simply here removing the S's, yeah. And I think we have gotten everything correct and we are ready to go back to our view files and generate them. Let's run this and make sure everything is correct. Yeah, great. Now let's create a new file and it will be a SwiftUI view type. Great. We call it episodes view. We will just close this preview provider here because we won't use local items. If you can generate some local items from this, for example, an example with real data, you can just make use of this provider, preview provider. Because we are getting the data from server and not using cache, etc., etc., it's better to just omit the preview for now and see the result in the simulator. So here we will define an observed object variable called viewModel, and it will be episode viewModel, simply. And what is this doing? What is this observed object? It's a property wrapper type that subscribes to an observable object and invalidates a view whenever the observable object changes. So it's listening to our view model at published. Whenever it changes, it's just making the view reinvoked and showing the new data gotten from server. Great. Now here we want to handle the different states our view can be in. For example, if our view model.state is loading, we want to show a spinner with a large style type. Great. Else, if our view model state is in error state, we just want to show a text calling this error. This is one of the items of the checklist I provided in the GitHub link below. Make sure to check it out and make changes to this code so it will show the error gotten from server. And else, if everything is okay and our view model state is complete, we want to just iterate on our view model episodes and show it on a list. In SwiftUI, whatever you call whatever you get. So for example, if you say list, you will get a list. It's like the UI table view in UI kit, and it's simple as that to call and create a list. So now in the list, we want to iterate through the episodes of our view model. So we'll say for each, which is a built-in SwiftUI function, we will say viewModel.episodes. And for each episode, we want to, for example, show the name. Yeah, simple as that. But don't forget to provide an identifier here. For example, ID, just the ID of our episode. You provided an array of items, and you may also need to tell SwiftUI how it identifies each of your items uniquely. So it knows how to update when values change. For example, when the name of the specific episode changes, it will be handled by this ID identifier. Great. Now I think we can just make it more complex. For example, putting it in a horizontal stack, which is like the HS stack we have in the UI kit. Put the name, put the episode that, for example, episode, which will be the code of that episode, and let's run our application for the first time. So now you can see that it's showing hello world. This is the point that we have forgotten to fix, which is in the scene delegate, it will initialize our first screen, which is the content view as it's written here. The content view is a view generated by SwiftUI automatically, which we don't want, so we will be deleting it like this. And in the scene delegate, we will just say our episodes view will be our initial view. Now let's run it again and see the result. Great, we are seeing our episodes list. Just some UI tweaks we can do it here. Just for example, adding a navigation view up here, making a space between these two episode codes and episode name. Make this, for example, a secondary color, and having a padding will be great. So let's say, for example, it will have a padding. We will use a spacer view here. What is this spacer? It's a flexible that expands along the major axis of its containing stack layout, or on both axes, no difference. It depends on which of these items you are using. Now, also we have to add this list in the navigation view. Remember how hard it was to use navigation views in UIKit? It's as simple as this, just putting it in a navigation view, omitting every segues, hard layout setups, and just run this to see everything is okay. Great. We also want to have a navigation bar title so we can show something here. We also forgotten to make this a secondary color. We will say foreground color should be the secondary. Our navigation view here will be have a navigation bar title. For example, a text call we can more to episodes. Simple as that. Let's run it again and see everything works fine. Great. Now what we want to add as a final trick is to add just episode detail view. So when we click on each of these episodes, it will show details of each of these episodes. So we will create a new SwiftUI view, calling it episode view, as simple as that. In this episode view, we'll remove this. Also, what we want to get is an episode ID from the previous page, which will be a string. Also, we will have an observed object called view model, and it will have a episode view model type initializer. Great. Now we'll also handle again the views in different states. For example, in a vertical stack, if our view model state is in loading process, just show the spinner as large style, here style large. And for example, if it's in error state, if view model dot state is error, just show text called error. Else, if we have completely gotten our data from server, we will say complete. And here, what we will do just simply showing a form, which is like the thing you are seeing in your settings view, for example, in the iOS device, and etc. In the form view, we can have different sections. For example, section of details, which will be on the text called details. And in this section, we want to just show the view model dot episode dot air date, for example, in a text, obviously. So before running, make sure to make this, unwrap this here, for example, giving it a simple date, for example, 1st of December 2021, and just run it again. So this time, I think everything will be going to run correctly. Because as you remember, we defined this air date optional, and we have to unwrap it. Yeah, everything is going to run correctly. Great. Now let's go back to our episodes view, but before that, make sure to set up our view model on appearance of this vertical stack, or just the whole view, by calling view model dot setup with an ID of episode ID. Now let's go back to episodes view. The thing that we want to add here is a navigation link. So whenever we click on this, we want to go to the details page, which is this episode view with the episode's ID. So let's call a navigation link, which will have a destination. The destination as navigation ID is our episode view, which will have an episode ID of our episode.id. Simple as that. And as a label, it will have the row we have defined before. Now I think everything is set up correctly, and let's run our project and see if we can go to our episode detail view. So great. Now we go to the pilot episode, for example. If we can see the air date. You can see on a space here. It's like the problem we had in the episodes view. We don't set any navigation bar title for our single episode view. So for that, in our vertical set, we will say navigation bar title to be a text containing the view model dot episode dot name, and it will have an inline display mode because in the details view we usually don't show large titles. Yeah, I forgot to add the mode here, display mode inline. Yeah, everything is cool. So let's add a new section and call it characters section, characters. And we want to iterate through the characters of each episode, so we will use for each again. But before that, let's put it in a scroll view, horizontal scroll view this time. Remember how hard it was to use a scroll view and set up it in a storyboard. Now it's as easy as typing scroll view and calling it vertical or horizontal. We will have an H stack in it. And in this H stack, we want to iterate through the characters of each episode. Episode, characters, and calling it an ID of ID. For each character in, we will say, for example, in a vertical stack, we want to show image of that character with the URL of the character image, because we want to use this remote image to get the image from server, and also text calling the characters dot name. Let's run and check if everything is correct. Forgotten to add the view model here. So before running our project, let's unwrap these characters also, because we have defined it optional, and make it just an empty array if it fails to contain any character. We will run the project now and see if it's showing our characters of each episode. Now let's go to the pilot episode, for example, and yeah, we can see the characters. Few tweaks we can add to these characters. For example, make it a circle view, make it smaller, and scale the image to fit the circle we want to say. For example, scaled to fit. Using this clip shape, we can clip anything, any shape to our views. For example, we use circle, rectangle, and different options. We will have a frame option modifier here, which will have a 120 to height 120. And also we will have to add the padding to it. So for the final time, let's run our application and see everything is going to work fine and correctly. Great. Now we have added our characters. We can see the characters of each episode. For example, Jerry Smith with his strange beard. Hope you enjoyed this workshop. Make sure to contact me via LinkedIn, and resources showing here you can use, for example, our GitHub project, which you can use to develop this project and adding more features to it. And this is our instructions for our Apollo GraphQL library and our API, and also search Tadeh Alexani on LinkedIn or email me at tadeh@formaloo.com. More contact ways are available at my personal website. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day or night. Thank you.